Hey, good morning, and thank you all. Thank you, Pastor Lawrence, for for the introduction. Thank you, Pastor Ronnie, and committee for inviting me to be part of this conference. I feel honored and privileged. Hey, my name is Fred Toke, and I'm from Singapore, and I am also residing now in the U.S. Alabama is my home state now. So I've been there for the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm back in Singapore to get my vaccination. And I just had my vaccination, Pfizer vaccination shot 2 days ago. So I have another shot to go in the middle of March, and then I'll be back in the States in April. Um, just get my slides ready. Today, we're going to talk about self-care, and more than just talking about mental care for ourselves. We also need to talk about how we can take care of our own physical, mental, spiritual, and social, a holistic approach towards self-care. Well, my name is Brett Toke. I'm the Tokimon, and then my student in America call me Dr. Tokimon, like in Pokemon. All right. This pandemic, as Pastor Lawrence has said, has caused a lot of psychological stress to a lot of people. And according to the mental health statistics given by World Health Organization, it says that 1 in 4 people in the world are suffering from depression. My goodness, 1 in 4 people. 1 in 6 people is suffering from some kind of anxiety problem or anxiety disorders. And suicides in the world, 1 at 10 every 2 seconds. One, two, three. Someone in the world is attempting suicide right now. And many of them are attempting suicide without knowing Jesus. Well, that's a 10. 1 attempt every 2 seconds. One death from suicide every 40 seconds. This is a greater pandemic than what COVID is charging the world today. Distress, depression, anxiety is not a 21st century problem. It has been around for centuries, even in the time of King David. And he went through depression, and he described it in Psalms 23 that he went through the valley of shadow of death. And in Psalms 42, he says, "Why are you cast down, O my soul?" He was talking to his own soul, his psyche, his emotions, his mind, his thought life. "And why are you in turmoil within me?" And in Psalms 25, verse 17, he said, "Relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish." In Psalms 25, he said, "I am worn out from my groaning. All night long," sounds like a song, all night long, "I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears." Doesn't this speak of someone who is going through depression, who is going through a lot of distress, that at night he just can't sleep and he's crying and wetting his bed with tears? He said, "My heart is sick, withered like grass, and I have lost my appetite. My knees give way," in Psalms 109. He says, "My knees give way from fasting. My body is thin and gone." It does sound that David went through time of a period of depression, a period of distress, and even a period of anxiety. Essentially, he's saying, "I've lost my appetite and I lost my weight. I can't sleep and I am depressed." This has been a century-old uh, problem. And it's not just a 21st century situation. And therefore, we do need to take care of ourselves lest we may fall into one of those statistics. According to World Health Organization, there are 4 dimensions of health. You have physical health, and you have emotional health, you have your spiritual health, and you have your social health. Very interestingly, that the World Health Organization actually adding spiritual health as part of the dimensions of health. So it's not just physical health. They said you got to be wholesome. Health had to be looked from a very holistic perspective. And so, from a very holistic perspective, each one of them will affect our being. So, the four dimensions of health, according to World Health Organization, it's a very holistic approach towards looking at the person's well-being, the physical well-being of the person, the emotional well-being of the person, the spiritual well-being of a person, and the social well-being of a person. And World Health Organization term it as a MESS, MESS, physical as in material, our material body, that's our physical, and the emotional, spiritual, and social. And you know what? God is also very keen and very concerned about these same four dimension of health in our lives. And each time Jesus healed someone in the New Testament, he said, when you be made whole, it is not just a physical healing, it is also an emotional healing. It's also a repair of sorts in their spiritual and their social life. It's a holistic approach towards healing. And this is what we should be looking at, not just, just making sure that our mental well-being is at its peak or at its top all the time. We need to take care of all these four dimensions. And let's look into each one of them individually. Firstly, physical health. Troubled times affect two areas in our life very quickly. Troubled times will affect your rest and your appetite. If you show me someone who cannot sleep and have lost their appetite, like what David had mentioned, he just couldn't sleep at night. He was drenched with tears, as he mentioned, and he lost his appetite. Show me someone who lost their appetite. Show you someone who could not sleep at night. I'll show you the same person who may be suffering from some kind of psychological distress, and that will affect the physical well-being as a result of that. We make a lot of appointments with people and the stuff that we need to do, but we don't make appointments with rest. In fact, rest is the best anti-stressor. Rest melts stress away. Well, rest and its siblings, relaxation, allow us to reconnect with the world in and around us and inviting ease in our lives and a felt sense of belonging. And so rest is very important. The word restoration comes from the word rest. You cannot have restoration until you found rest. And this is where David wrote in his Psalms 23 that God made him lie down beside still water. And God made him rest so that his soul can be restored. So it's a process. You need to rest before you can restored or be refreshed. On an average, an adult need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep to have our brain to work optimally. The younger we are, the more sleep we need. As we grow older, 7 to 9 hours would suffice. And according to statistics, people are in the 21st century. People are actually sleeping just between 5 to 6 hours, and that's not good. And that will affect their mental health, and possibly because of their information overloading. Sleep deprivation cause a risk of cancer, obesity, weak immune system, a risk of heart disease, increased blood pressure, and even risk of death. It's a result, effect of sleep deprivation. There are two steps to rest. David wrote that so succinctly in Psalms 21. He says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters, and he restores my soul." Now, the first step to rest is to live in contentment. The more we want, the more stress we actually invite into our lives. I remember during the 2004 tsunami, I was part of the medical team that went to Indonesia in the north of Sumatra, and we arrived 2 weeks after the tsunami. As we drove up north from Medan, we drove out to, I think it's Banda Aceh. As we drove up, we can see the devastation. But children, Indonesian young children, were playing soccer on any open field. They were playing soccer. They were already, playing and enjoying themselves in spite of what actually happened. That's because they don't have a lot to lose. If it happened in Singapore, our children will be depressed because they have lost their cell phone, they have lost their iPad, they have lost so many things to grieve over. The less you have, the less you grieve. Well, I love this quote by Leonardo da Vinci. He says, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Now, when he mentions simplicity, it doesn't mean that we are simply living. He meant we live simply. Be simple about our lifestyle. Now, simplicity here doesn't mean simply living as I mentioned. Now, if you remove the first letter S and the last letter Y, you have the word implicit. That means when you're living simply, you know what you want in life. That is implicit thought, plan, alignment in your life. That this is distraction, this is extra, this is superfluous. I don't need this. I just want to maintain what I have. So living simply means you are implicit about how you are living, not taking on every load that's been put on you, or not wanting what your neighbors have. Know what you want, know what you have, and enjoy it, and be contented with it. As pastors, you guys, I really appreciate you for your work because there's so many things to think of. You have your own family to be stressed over, and then you have your church to maintain, and you have your own house and your cars and your own about the your lifestyle and your fun money to think of, to stress over, and then your sermon to prepare, and then youth group, sometimes they can be challenging you, and you have to learning, you have to study. You have your members. In fact, the greater the numbers in your church, the greater the stress. Yeah, and the conflict in the church, and your own health that you need to um, exercise and all that. Now, if all these are stressors. Now, if all these stressors take place in your mind, then this is going to trouble you. When this become internalized, then you will be troubled. This we call this inflammation of stress overload, and therefore you're on that constant threat of having to think about how to resolve all these problems. Well, we have to deal with this. Firstly, if you are doing too much, getting too much, owing too much, well, you need to deal with this. Firstly, you need to delegate. I think Jethro told Moses, hey, don't do it all by yourself. Relax, chill one corner, delegate. What those things that are not supposed to be yours to do, delegate to the younger people, delegate. Number two, eliminate those things that it's not part of your plan, and align yourself with God, and align yourself with your life, your purpose, and not to be distracted easily. And lastly, you need to have leisure. All these things take away our leisure time. You must have a break. You must have a time for enjoyment and all that, so that you can then learn to free yourself from all this stress. Second step to stress is to learn to let go and let God. Sometimes we want to control the outcome of everything. The irony is that the more we want to control, the more stressful we are, because everybody else outside of me are entitled to their opinions and to what they want to do. If I try to control everybody and everything and all the outcomes that I plan to do, then I will be extremely stressful. Living in America, they are sport-loving people, and they have all kinds of sports like football team and all that. The major sport is football, and not the soccer that we know. Football, and the icon they use are powerful animals like the lions, the tigers, and the bears and the eagles. But David's icon on the sheep, meh, simple. He doesn't saw himself as one of these powerful animals. He's contented as being a sheep because God was his shepherd. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Now, note this: God made him, God led him, and God restored him, and God led him to the path of righteousness. What did David do? David surrendered. He let God take control. God led him to green pastures, make him lie down to rest beside still waters. He restored his soul. He led him to path of righteousness. God takes the lead. God was in control. David let go of it. If holding on does not bring you happiness, let it go, and then let God. If holding on does not let you grow, let it go and let God. Don't try to do everything. Don't try to be God. If holding on does not propel you forward, Let it go and let God take the driver's seat. You know, the more you want to control, the more anxious you are, the more sleepless nights you will have because you want to control the outcome. But when we surrender this to God, God will take care of those things. The two steps to rest: number one, you need to live in contentment. Number two, you need to let it go. Now, food and mood are linked. You see, when your mood is down, you have no appetite for food. That's what happened to David. He has no appetite. He lost weight, because he was feeling dis-ease. See, when you are not getting the energy, the fuel for your body through food, your carbohydrates, your proteins, and all that, then you will slump from disease. It will affect your body. It become a disease. When these two separate words join as one, then your physical body is being affected. David wasn't eating well. He said he was thin. He lost weight. He was feeling gaunt. He was weak. And for his physical health took a toll on him. And when we go through this from disease to disease, very soon it may end up as disease. So there was this energy depletion in David's life, and therefore he cried out to God, "Why am I so downcast?" and all that. And that's what he wrote in the book of Psalms. There was another guy in the Bible. His name is Elijah. I think we all know him. He came from this nondescript place like Tishbe. Nobody knew where it was, but from a place where nobody knew what the place was. He began to call down fire. His epitome of his ministry was to call down fire from heaven. And he has his high, but then he plunged to his low when the queen of the day decided that he should be killed, and he escaped and he went down into depression. As he lay down and slept under the broom tree, as what the Bible described here. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." Now, as he lay down and slept, God did not try and wake him up and told him, as we know later on, he was asked to go back to where he came from in Damascus and appoint this person as king and look for your disciple called Elijah and all that. God did not tell him to do that. First, he allowed him to lay down and sleep because all he needs is rest. And then he needs food. While he was resting and sleeping, an angel prepared food for him. And when the food was ready, the angel woke him up and said, "Get up and eat." How nice. I wish I have an angel like that. And so he ate and drank and lay down again. Again, God did not disturb the sleep until much later when he had enough of sleep, enough of food. Then God told him and gave him the instruction to go back and do his task. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, "Get up and eat some more." Man, God, give me this angel, man. I like this angel. But this is what God is concerned about. You see, God is concerned firstly about your rest. God is also concerned about your physiology, food, your food intake. And he was concerned about David because David said in Psalms 23, he said, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." He, could, he cried out, he lamented that he lost his appetite, but God prepared a table before him in the presence of his enemies. Mood and food are linked. By the way, the word restaurant comes from the word rest too. Yeah, I miss being in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia because you guys have the best food in this entire world. Rest plus nourishment plus exercise equals physical. When we are undergoing some kind of stress, this thing will be taken out. Rest will be taken out. Nourishment will be taken out. Exercise will be taken out too. And therefore, your physical health will be impacted, will be impeded. And so whatever that you are going through right now, whatever dark valleys that you may be in right now, remember, we need to be disciplined. We need to rest. We need to be nourished. We need to exercise. At what David and Elijah experienced from God. Remember, when God talked about health, He's speaking as a holistic perspective, like how the World Health Organization has come up with this idea of what health is. It's four-dimensional. So physical, emotional, spiritual, and social. Let's talk about emotional. Emotional, it's about the calming of the mind. Uh, in Psalm 23, verse 3, He restored my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness. It's very interesting that these two words, restoration and righteousness, are in the same verse. And restoring my soul has to do with what is right and who is right. So the way to come of mind to understand this is the word soul in the Greek, as some of you are scholars here know that so the word soul is psyche, and that's where we have our English word psyche, the mind and your emotions. And in order to calm our mind, we need to identify what is wrong and what is bad. Many times we judge what is wrong as bad. So, we have our down days when we don't preach our sermon as well as we ought. We feel we should be, and so we feel a little down. And instead of, identifying it, okay, that's not too good, it's wrong, but that doesn't mean that it is bad. When someone says something maybe unkind, it doesn't mean that they are bad. Perhaps it's the personality, because of their personality flaw. But every time if we judge someone or something as bad, we go into the judgment mode. My mom would cane me when I was young. She would use the rod. She followed what Proverbs says, spare the rod, spoil the child. Every time she caned me, she punished me. I said, this is wrong. But it doesn't mean that my mom is bad. It doesn't mean if I make a mistake, I am bad. See, the problem with our soul is that when we judge what is going on as bad, then we are putting up more filters in our brain to look out for dangers and threat. Let me explain this further. Your brain is designed mainly to protect you. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. That's not the purpose, or that's not the main purpose of the brain. The main purpose of the brain is to protect you. For instance, let me give you an analogy. If you climbing a mountain, you walk towards the edge of the cliff, wanting to have a better look at the sunset. As you walk closer to the cliff, your heart begins to palpitate. Your heart begins to beat fast because your brain is telling you danger, danger, danger. And your brain is not telling you, hey, beautiful sunset, don't care about the danger. The brain will tell you and warn you of the danger. It doesn't care about the beautiful sunset. It cares about the threat that's out there, the potential threat that's out there. So it's always looking out for threats. Now, if we assess our world from the perspective of wrong, then everything that's wrong can be corrected. But when we assess things as bad, then it is condemned because it has been judged. Not everything that is wrong is bad. The more bad that we assess, the more bitter we become. The more bitter we become, the more anxious we are about the threat that's going on in and around us. We know this story when the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the priests threw this woman who was caught committing an adultery. And Jesus said this famous word, let the one who had never sinned throw the first stone. She sinned, and God saw it as wrong, but God doesn't condemn her. You see, what is wrong can be corrected. What is bad leads to condemnation. The one who had never sinned throw the first stone. And when nobody did, they walk away. Jesus asked the woman, where are those people who want to throw stone at you, who want to condemn you? And has no one condemned you? She said, no. And Jesus said this famous three words, neither do I. We see things from a wrong perspective, yes. We don't see things from a bad perspective, because when we see more things from the bad perspective, then we become a judge, and God's righteousness is being pushed out of our system. See, David says, he stole my soul and he led me into path of righteousness for his name's sake. So it's God that is to be the judge and not us. I thank God that I'm not God, because if I were God, yeah, a lot of people would not make it to heaven because we're so bitter towards others. But God is more gracious, and we need to look at things from God's perspective. See, your brain is on the lookout for what is right, what is wrong all the time. But if it's right and wrong, that's fine. Okay, this can be corrected, that can be corrected. The food is not cook to my liking, well, it's wrong. It's not necessarily bad. So we don't blame the chef and all that. But when we see what is wrong is bad, it will consume us. So it becomes a black and white perspective of the world. It's either right or bad. It is either good or bad. And when we saw things, more things as bad, then even the right will also be bad. And this is where your brain will on a hair trigger to a threat, to respond to a threat. And therefore you have all this physiological response. When everything is seen as bad, then you're on a hypervigilance of looking out for all these threats. In one bad leads to everything that's bad, and so they're all linked now, and then it become one big problem. What happened when I was a child is 10 years old, and this happened now again when I was 40 years old, and when this link, it become one big bad wolf here. And when all these are now incarnate into the system of a person, then this becomes the filter of how they saw the world. When we see the world from our own filter, everything is bad, then the world is bad. And when our soul is not rested or restored, our judgment will be impaired. Therefore, David says, my soul is rested, and God led me into the path of his righteousness, not my righteousness, because David complained about all these people who were out to attack him and what's happening. Hey, it is God's judgment. It is God's righteousness. It is God's office to do that. It's not my office to judge and condemn anybody, even myself. Back to the story of Elijah. He went down because he was afraid of his own life. He said to God, I have zealously served the Lord Almighty, but of but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed everyone of your prophets. Now, see the overgeneralized statement here. The people of Israel, everybody is bad. They are all bad. They torn down your altars. They kill everyone. And I am the only one left. You see what happened here is that he overgeneralized everything in his mind. So it became a threat that the way his worldview becomes very, very negative. I am the only one left. But God had to correct him and says, hey, I reserve 7,000 others in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal. See, the thing is, when we are on that judgment, everything is bad. We become so negative and we overgeneralize everything. And this is where our peace is being taken out from our system. Obviously, Elijah wasn't feeling at peace with these kind of thoughts. He thought that he was the only one to carry the weight of the world on his shoulder, but God said there are 7,000 others. There are 7,000 others who are doing the same. So don't see yourself as the only one. We need to learn how to deal with our own emotions. See, when your emotions are high, your intelligence are low. These two are not good bedfellows, yeah? High emotions, low intelligence. Show me someone who is angry, shouting and yelling in a mall. I show you someone whose intelligence has dropped down to the basement. When you fall in love, high emotions. When I fall in love, it will be forever. No. Love is work. You got to work hard at love, and high emotions, low intelligence. We need to learn to calm our mind. Right? We cover physical, emotional health. Let's cover spiritual health. Spiritual health here. Spiritual health. I think you guys, as being pastors, know this better than I do. It's about surrendering our life to God. David, when he was younger, he had nothing to lose. He was a shepherd boy. He slaughtered the lions and the bears, and then he slaughtered Goliath with just a stone. Because all he had was God, and he trusted God, and his life was with God. And he got basically nothing to lose at that position. But when he became a king, that's where the identity game comes into play. Now, as a king, he has a lot to lose. He has a kingdom to lose. He has a position to lose. He has a wealth to lose. When you have everything to lose, the focus now is no longer on God, but the focus now is on me. When there's so much to do, there's so many accuser in his life. So the focus now is on me rather than on God that when he was younger. And this is where he cried out to God. I am an object of scorn to my accuser. When they see me, they shake. their heads. And all these verses that we have read earlier, about him not sleeping and all that, is about trying to preserve himself. And then he became depleted as a result of that. And this is where he turned to God. Sometimes God allow us to be depleted to a point where we feel that, hey, we are no longer in control. Let God now take control of my life. And he surrendered it back to God. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, I shall not lack. He was a king who became a shepherd. And he talked about, he was a shepherd who became a king. And he talked about the king who became the shepherd of his life. But he allowed God to take control. It's the same thing with Elijah. I'm paralleling the story between David and Elijah here. When he was unknown, there's nothing to lose here. There's nothing to lose until when he called down fire. There was a position that he attained, and there's so much acclamation about what he did. And when the queen wanted to kill him, this is where it becomes me thing rather than a God thing. So he was depleted. And God, after allowing him to sleep and gave him food, and God wants his attention. We read this in First Kings chapter 19. After the mighty windstorm, the earthquake, the fire, and after all this great mighty stuff happened, God wasn't in it. But after this, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. He said, God is not in the big stuff. God is in the gentle whisper. God is in us, speaking to us. Sometimes we need to be still to know that he is still God of our lives. God is not in the conflict. God is not in the politics. God is not in the building that we are trying to salvage or fight over. God is not in all these things, but God is that still small voice. And sometimes we just need to ready ourselves and be still to listen to him. And David said the same thing. He prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemy. You anoint my head with oil. As we know, shepherd, pour oil on the head of the sheep, because in those desert, the farmland of Israel, you have this fly called bot fly, also known as nose fly, and they will fly into the nostril of the sheep, and there it will lay its eggs, and the larvae will then be crawling around the head of the sheep, and then it create a lot of discomfort, and the sheep will then knock his head against the wall, against the bark of the tree or rock, in order to get that discomfort out. And the reason for pouring that oil on his head is to, like a lubricant, it's like an ointment. It will prevent. It's like a repellent. It will, repel the fly from flying into the nostril of the sheep. So we need to be still and be still in order for us to get our spiritual life back in order again. God is concerned about the four dimensions of health, just like how World Health Organization has described it to be: physical, emotional, spiritual, and social health. David says, surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord. So it's going back to the house of the Lord, back to be with the other worshippers and the priests and all that. Because when we are deprived, we tend to isolate ourselves. When we are depressed, we tend to get away from the crowd. We tend to move away and isolate ourselves. Now remember, isolation leads to desolation. God is concerned about how we function as a community. We need to continue to work as a community, not as an individual. The difference between bitter, the word bitter, and the word better. The main difference is this letter I and the letter E. The difference is just one letter. So you have the letter I in the word bitter, you have the letter E in the word better. When we internalize our pain, when we isolate ourselves, we become bitter. When we are able to express, our pain and externalize it, and we are able to, extrovert it, as be able to extrovert our, pain and ourselves, and be part of community. You know what? We become better. People who commit suicide usually stay individualized. They isolate themselves. The same with Elijah. He isolated himself. But God told him after he was fed and he slept, he says, go back the way you came to the desert of Damascus. There, when you get there, anoint Hazael, Jehu, and Elijah. God gave him task to go back, and this is where he has his community. Go back to where he come from. You see, the ministry of Elijah was in the northern kingdom of Israel. At that time of his ministry, Israel was divided into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. His calling as a prophet was in the north, that is towards for Israel. But when he escaped from his pain, he went all the way down to Judah. God called him to go back to his community, go back to where you come from. Where you appoint your successor, Elijah. Community is very important. We all know that when we have barbecue, we put all these charcoals together, it will burn well. But when we take one of those charcoal out from the burning coals, it will just die on its own. As we grow, as we reach the pinnacle of our position in our career as a pastor, when we arrive here at the top, you know what? This is where we become vulnerable. Because it's hard to share your problem with members. It's obviously, we don't want to discourage them because we ourselves as preachers, as pastors, are going through some stress on our own, and therefore sometimes we struggle alone. It is always lonely at the top. Andrew Stockland, 30 years old, husband and a father of 3 children, committed suicide 2 years ago. His occupation, senior pastor of a growing church. Lonely at the top. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I think in a community like this, I'm so glad that you have a conference of all the AG pastors coming together. As peers, I think we should be helping one another and not be judging one another, because one of the main reasons people don't want to share their problem is because they don't want to be judged as bad. Though going through some crisis in life, feeling down, it may not be the right thing to feel, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to be. But because we judge ourselves as bad, we don't want others to judge us badly, and therefore we kept it to ourselves. The more we are able to express it, the better we become. In the world today, we all are communicating from our home, especially during the pandemic, and this is where isolation comes in, and where the problem of the psychological problems of the world has increased. More suicide, more depression, more anxiety, because this is how we commute, this is how we work today. We need to come together. We need to have that community. We need to be able to have friends that we can trust enough to share our pain, safe enough to share our pain and not be judged. Let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. These are the 4 dimensions of health, physical, emotional, spiritual, and social. This whole being is health seen from a holistic perspective, not just a spiritual perspective, not just a physical perspective, not just the emotional perspective. All this has to be taken as a whole. So when Jesus healed the woman who was suffering from this issue of blood, she said, today you're whole. And then when we are able to have this, then we become overcomers. So physical health, rest and eat well. Emotional health, hey, learn to let go and let God judge not. Find out to judge. That is the office of God. That is God's work, not our work. The more we want to judge, the more bitter we become. Spiritual, hey, let's be filled and continue to be still and relate and dwell in the house of the Lord. These are the 4 dimensions of health that will help us to better our well-being. You have to take care of yourself as you take care of others. So I'm going to close with this. Can I pray for you guys? Lord, we thank you for this moment that all of us as your servant can come in a manner like this. Lord, there's a lot of genuineness in wanting to serve you, in wanting to honor you and glorify you. But sometimes the system, the things of the world, the politics that's going on around us can take its toll on us. Lord, help us to see that we need to maintain and continue to work on our well-being from the holistic perspective. We need to take care of our physical health. We need to take care of our own emotional well-being and our spiritual health as well as our social health. And I pray, Father, for all these pastors, leaders, Lord, for them to be ministered by you, Lord, through this conference. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred. That was very insightful. And I think we are all mesmerized by your slide presentation. There were many questions being asked about the slides, the PowerPoint and all that. Great teaching, yes. And we're going to take up some of the questions. I think Dr. Fred, you'll be able to see it from the chat box. I think there were already some questions.
Right. Yeah, I'm reading that. Yes, great to see you from Batu Pahat. Yes. Right. Are you using OBS for your background? If not, which program is it? OBS, I'm not sure what's OBS, but I'm using Zoom. Zoom has the background, so I'm using the background as my slide. Yeah, that's what I do because, having a slide and another video on me speaking, so audience will have to look at my slide and look for me and image all the view of all the people. Yeah, so I thought putting them together might help to get that kind of attention. Yeah. Yes, Daryl has yeah. I did not use the mic properly. I'm sorry about that. Okay. I am using a green screen, of course, so that it will not have those missing parts in my body when I move. So green screen will work better. Yeah. All right, and I don't see any question. If you have any question.
Yeah, there is a question.
New.
Yeah, that's right. Talking about wrong and bad.
Yeah. How can one know the word so well and yet justify himself that he's doing adultery, raping, cheating, as perfectly in God's sight, as seen in many high-profile individuals? I'm sure many name come to my mind, our minds when we talk about this. The thing is that he may have done, some of these ministers, pastors may have done something that's abjectly wrong, but then again, it's not my position to judge. My position is to see how, if he is alive or he's around me, then my position is how can I correct him from what he had done wrong, rather than to judge him as bad and condemn him. In fact, if we give people, some room for correction, some room for maneuvering and to recognize it, and then, we can help the person overcome it. David murdered the husband of Bathsheba, or at least was complicit to it. And he committed adultery, and Nathan came in and told him that, hey, you have done it. But God forgave him and God corrected him, and he acknowledged that. See, what comes in my mind is the difference between guilt and condemnation. Wrong is a result, when we are wrong, we are guilty about it. It can lead to correction. But when we are bad, we are condemned, then we are ashamed of ourselves. The difference between guilt and shame is that guilt attacks the action, shame attacks the actor. Guilt sometimes is the work of God to prick our conscience, to tell us, hey, we need to back up and we need to turn away from our wicked ways, so that we can confess our sin and God will be faithful and just to forgive us from all our unrighteousness. The work of the devil is to condemn us. He comes to steal and kill and destroy, but God has come to give us life and life abundantly. And so I would like to see from what is going on in the world from a perspective that let God be the judge of it all. If this person comes into my life, if I can help to correct the wrongdoing, I will be happy to do that. And, it's not my position or my office to dictate, what the person did is bad, or be condemned as a result of that. Let me move on. What is the best way to deal with people's having anger problem? I think anger is a symptom. Anger is not a problem. The problem is the person with unresolved issue. So if you can, you can eradicate the source of anger, you will eradicate anger altogether. So if a person has this unresolved issue about the past, and you feel that, the world is a danger to them, as it's always a potential threat of, others, and they're becoming very insecure about what's going on, and therefore, they're on a head trigger to an explosion. So we need to go into the root problem. You correct the root, you correct the fruit. So anger is not a problem. It is a symptom of a deeper problem within the person. So, you don't manage the anger, you manage the person who is explosive, or who is often on that head trigger to that, to that aversive response. So know yourself and have the person know about themselves. And this is where we psychologists come in, right? We don't deal with the symptoms, we deal with the root problem. If we can find the root problem, if the person can acknowledge that there is a root problem in this, then they can correct it and they can move on from there. How about church regular visitor who is a transsexual and want to serve in the church but still living the old life? Well, that's a that's a loaded question. Um, I am not in the position to say who can serve in your church or in our church and all that, but I think they are, if they want to serve, I think we need to go through the discipleship classes, and then through those discipleship 101 classes and all that, then they know what is right and what is God's view of these things. Then they can correct themselves before they can, serve. But if they insist on living in the old life, then the church has the right, to stipulate, what who can serve and who may not be able to serve in the church, and because of those stipulations, then you may want to advise and counsel this person. So transsexual is a debatable issue, because some people that think that is a nature problem, and some people say it's a nurture problem. So if it's a nurturing, it's a problem as a result of nurture, then it can be dealt with very easily. And American Psychological Association has come out 2 years ago and said that homosexuality and all this actually a result of nurturing more than nature. And the professor who actually came up with this and posted in the APA website has got death threat as a result of this. But it comes from someone who is not a Christian, from someone who is a scientist, who actually came out with this idea that homosexuality is not really a nature problem, it's a nurture problem. And because it's a nurture problem, we can relearn our life and then be transformed back again to our original gender. What are the signs and symptoms of a person having depression? At what point the person needs to seek help? Great question, Victor. I use the acronym SOAR. You check your SOAR or check this person's SOAR and see whether these four things are being affected or not. Number one, S is social. If socially they are impeded, they are impaired, they don't want to get out of the home, they want to, stay at home, draw the curtains, and just sleep, and doesn't want to do anything, socializing is impaired, then that's a first tick. First red flag. Occupation, or if they stop working, they doesn't want to work anymore, they're no longer productive in their work, they don't care about the work, they don't want to get out to go back to work, and then that's another check mark that we need to look at. So they rather stay at home and not work and be productive, because work give us meaning to get up in the morning and give us that impetus to go out. And then A is appetite, as we mentioned. So S, social, O, occupation, A, appetite, and R is rest, as we mentioned in our session today. So if, when I see my patient, I check on SOAR, are you able to socialize? Are you going out? Are you staying at home? Are you working? Are you not able to work? Are you eating well? You're not eating, or are you able to sleep at night or not, and all that. And when all these are in the negative zone, then the person is possibly suffering from some kind of depression, and that the person needs some help or even more professional help. Okay. All right. What else? Any tips on how to provide counseling over the phone or internet, especially in this season of a pandemic where social distance is compulsory? I think a great question again, Victor. I've been doing uh, distant counseling, long distance counseling for years since I moved to America. So I have patients back in Singapore and Asia, and I've been doing this through Zoom. I'm officially a zombie, not a zombie, a zombie. I've been using Zoom for the past 5 years. And so, yes, obviously in-person counseling will always be better, but if we can work out the technical issue, and make sure that, your Zoom is correctly put up and it has that, calming effect, so that your background is not cluttered and all, make sure that like mine, I have this video of, waterfall to give that calming effect. And so, this is very important more than just that, whatever that you want to talk to your client or your members with. And so make sure that you're prepared, and make sure it can be very frustrating when the internet is weak, when Wi-Fi is weak. And so it can cause more anguish than help. So make sure that your internet is strong, and if you cannot do it via Zoom, and you can do it through WhatsApp or Telegram as well. Those are great device to use. Okay, and make sure that you are in a quiet room and there isn't a lot of distraction around. Okay, applying MESS to grief. How to help people to grieve well in the midst of so much loss today, especially when the normal sacred symbols of grievance, such as funerals, are no longer an option. Yeah, it's painful to know that someone passed on, and you're someone that you love, someone that's a family to you it's gone, and you're unable to be there for them, and to have that funeral rites and all. It can be very, very painful to the grieving family. I think the first thing we need to do is to tell them not to grieve, is to allow them to grieve. The more they grieve, the more connected they are to the deceased, and they need to process that. They need to let it go, and they need to, talk about it, and don't push them to stop grieving. Grieving can go on a lifetime. The younger the deceased, the longer the grieving process. The older the disease, the shorter the grieving process. Okay, so you got to look at this from that perspective. And a mother never stopped grieving, for the loss of a child, and you have to respect that. We just cannot tell the mother that you have to stop grieving and move on. But we have to let her process it, let her look at her situation, and be safe to talk about it. The more they're able to talk it in a safe environment, the more they're immune to the grief. Sometimes they're afraid to talk about it because they know and expect what will be the response of the counselor. That is to move on. God is taking care of your child, or God has taken, your loved ones, and He's in heaven and all that. Sometimes we try to use that maybe sincerely, to help the person who is grieving. But we need to allow the person to grieve and say to them, it's obvious that you love this person, and you know what, because you love this person, it's okay to cry, it's okay to grieve, it's okay to go through this moment, for a season. It's all right, and I'm here for you, and will be with you through it. If you need anything that I can do to help to alleviate this pain, we are here to help you, because we're part of this community. If it hurts you, it hurts me. So you give that time for them to process this, and not push them to move on too quickly. Again, the key is the younger the disease, the longer the grief process. Okay, the older the disease, the shorter the grief process. All right. David Young, as a pastor yourself from a mental health perspective, what would be your insights to us as ministers to progressively work on our mental health? Would you recommend having counselors, psychotherapists, and other professionals help as part of our regular? Okay, I'm biased. I say yes. I'm biased. Obviously, I say yes. I think it's good for pastors to have regular sessions. I have my own mentor. He's my professor in the university, and he's in his early 90s now. I'm in my early 60s, so he's about 30 years ahead of me, or 30 years older than me. So every month we have a session together. He has both a PhD in missiology and also a PhD in educational psychology. And so he's in both science and spirituality. And so I actually model my ministry after him because he's both in a mission. He has a PhD in missiology and he has a PhD in educational psychology. And so he being my professor, I thought, hey, that's a good mix and that's a good fusion. And I followed him. I took my my ministry in line with what he's doing. Yeah, and it's always very good to add out for pastors because you cannot really share your problem with members. So it's good to share with someone who is safe, who probably doesn't know your member. If he doesn't know your members and the people in your church, the better it would be because then there's no biasness that's in place during those sessions. So yes, I would encourage pastors to do that. I myself is doing that. Every month I meet up with my former professor. We talk about my life, talk about my ministry, and he's able to help me to align what I'm called to do and all that. I think it's extremely helpful. What is the cause of panic attack? How do we help someone? Am I over time now? Because I have more questions. Let me know, Dr. Pastor Lawrence, if I'm over
Yeah,
time.
we're still okay. We have about 2 minutes to go.
It's impossible to answer
It's
this
okay.
question in 2 minutes. So what is the cause of panic attack and how do we help someone who suffers from it? It is also, who also has physical irregular heart palpitation. Panic attack comes from the brain structure, the way the brain is being structured. It's usually as a result of a crisis that may have happened before. And so it is being stored in the brain. And so it becomes part of the filter of the brain. So anything that is similar to what had happened in the past, then it will create that panic attack, that short breathing pattern and heart palpitation and all that. I Let me share a story. It will take about 2 minutes. I hope you don't mind, about one of my patients. She had a problem with a maid, and she had to send the maid back to the Philippines. But the agency refused, and the agency threatened the maid. That if she doesn't buck up, she will. If she's being sent back to the Philippines, the agency or people in the Philippines, they will take care of her. And the maid got so frightened, she ran away, and this became a police case. So it had got nothing to do with my patient, but she was anxious. Every time she think about the maid, every time she thought about the agent, the agency director, she has this heart palpitation, she cannot sleep, she's short breathing pattern and all. And it must have come from somewhere that is unconscious. And so as we continue to try to find the root system, the root problem, I asked her to go back to her childhood if there were anything that happened. And when she was a child, her father was posted to Kenya in Africa. And in Kenya, Africa, that's where she grew up. And there was a time when they went into the safari and the car that they were in overturned. And then the truck behind, was nearby and took them back. And they were not severely injured. There were some bruises and all that, but the truck that was following them took them to the police station. And the drunk policeman locked them up and put them all behind bars for 24 hours. And she was so frightened. She was just 11 years old. So from then on, in that filter in the mind, anything to do with police is bad. So because this has been, her situation has resulted to be a police case. So because of that, she don't trust police in Kenya. She don't trust police everywhere in the world. She was never conscious of this. This has been parked in her subconscious. Now, if we can help patients who have numerous panic or anxiety attacks, try and find the root cause, and to then be mindful of that. It can help to minimize the panic attack. Today, that patient, because she realized that I'm in Singapore, the police here can be trusted. These are not police. So because she's able to be mindful of this, so she almost had zero panic attack since then. Okay, so I think I don't think I'm able to answer the rest of the question.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred. And from the chat box, many have expressed their appreciation and to say that it has been an extremely helpful session. Thank you once again. Shall we give Dr. Fred a round of applause? Thank you so much. And we really hope to see you in person in Malaysia. Thank you so much. God bless.